Jake Adams was the epitome of success, a billionaire CEO whose face appeared on magazine covers, business news channels, and global conferences. He lived in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city skyline, traveled in private jets, and made decisions that could shift entire markets. To the outside world, he had it all: wealth, power, influence. Yet beneath the polished surface of his glamorous life, Jake felt a growing emptiness gnawing at his soul. Every morning, he woke up to the silence of a high-rise apartment that felt more like a glass cage than a home. His calendar was packed with back-to-back meetings, strategy calls, and business deals worth millions, but none of it brought him peace. He moved through his days on autopilot, shaking hands, giving speeches, signing documents, while his heart felt increasingly distant and numb. The more his company grew, the more disconnected he became from himself. At night, he would stare out the window at the city lights, wondering what it all meant. The accolades, the money, the respect, they couldn't fill the void he carried inside. Jake's success had come at a cost: his relationships, his passions, and perhaps even his sense of purpose. Though surrounded by admirers and employees who hung on his every word, he had never felt more alone. The following evening, Jake sat in the silence of his apartment, absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone, not really focusing on anything in particular. His fingers swiped across the screen, stopping when an old photo caught his eye. It was buried deep in his gallery, a relic from a time he had long since moved past. The picture was faded, but the memories it held were as vivid as ever. He couldn't help but stare at it for a long time. It was of him, younger and carefree, laughing in the sun with Emma. Her eyes sparkled with a warmth he hadn't seen in years, a genuine joy that now seemed so far out of reach. Jake's heart tightened as he gazed at the photo. He had once believed in the future they had planned together: long conversations, lazy Sunday mornings, quiet walks through the park, and moments of love that felt endless. But somewhere along the way, those moments had faded, overshadowed by the world he had chosen to build. The high-rise buildings, the meetings, the endless flow of work, it all took priority. In the pursuit of success, he had left behind the woman who had truly seen him, the person who loved him for who he was, not what he could achieve. A deep sense of regret settled over him like a heavy blanket. He had never realized how much he missed her until that moment, how much he had lost in the name of ambition. The void that had grown within him over the years seemed to expand with every passing second, the loneliness of success becoming more apparent. He tried to dismiss the feelings, to push them aside like he had done for so long, but the emotions were overwhelming. The image of Emma lingered in his mind, her smile, her soft voice, the way she had always believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. Jake's hand shook slightly as he placed the phone down, suddenly aware of how much time had passed without him truly living. The walls of his penthouse, once a symbol of his achievement, now felt cold and uninviting. The city lights outside blurred into a sea of insignificance, like everything he had worked so hard for was fading into the background. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel it, to feel the loss, the emptiness, the deep ache in his chest. As the night stretched on, Jake sat there in the quiet, the weight of his own solitude pressing in on him. He couldn't remember the last time he had allowed himself to stop and simply feel. His life had been a whirlwind of endless tasks and unyielding expectations. But now, in the stillness, he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. He had built his empire, but in doing so, he had neglected the most important thing: his own happiness, his own connection to the people who mattered. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he missed being himself, before the suits, the meetings, the titles. Before he had convinced himself that success was the only way to prove his worth. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to take a step back and find what he had lost. He couldn't undo the past, but he could change the direction of his future. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, the sharp light of early sunlight pierced through the blinds of Jake's apartment, though he barely noticed it. He had barely slept, the weight of his thoughts keeping him up all night. The clock on the wall ticked with a steady rhythm, reminding him of how the hours seemed to slip away, yet he felt stuck in place, unable to escape the pull of regret and indecision that had been gnawing at him for months. As he rolled out of bed, the usual routine of getting ready for work felt mechanical, as if he were simply going through the motions. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling on his suit, tying his tie with a methodical precision that showed just how deeply ingrained this daily ritual had become. But there was a stark contrast now, an unsettling tension beneath the surface. As he stared at his reflection in the mirror, his eyes were tired, hollow even. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. The face was the same, but the expression was different. Gone was the ambitious drive, the hunger for success that had once propelled him forward. Instead, the face he saw now wore a mask of frustration and sorrow, the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down on his shoulders. He couldn't escape the feeling that he had lost something vital along the way, something irreplaceable. Jake forced himself to look away, his mind quickly drifting back to Emma. He hadn't seen her in months, but the memory of her was like a shadow that lingered around him, never far from his thoughts. He tried to convince himself that time would heal the wound, that he could just move on and focus on what was important, his career, his future, his legacy. But with every passing day, that sense of accomplishment felt less fulfilling. He had gained so much in terms of wealth, status, and success, but he had lost her, the one person who had ever made him feel truly seen. The thought of reaching out to her terrified him. What could he say? How could he possibly explain how he had let things fall apart? Would she even want to hear from him after everything? His chest tightened with anxiety at the mere thought. Yet, as he walked through his apartment, the loneliness crept in again, a constant reminder of the void he had created. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. The city outside, bustling with activity, felt distant, as if he were looking at it from another world, one that no longer made sense. The sound of his phone vibrating on the counter interrupted his thoughts. Jake glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat as he saw Emma's name flash across it. He had been waiting for this moment, though he had no idea how to respond. His fingers hovered over the screen, his heart racing. His mind screamed at him to pick up, to finally break through the silence, but his body hesitated. What if it was too late? What if all his regrets couldn't be undone? The message, a simple one, blinked at him from the screen, *Hey, Jake. I was thinking about you. Can we talk? Jake's breath caught in his throat. He could hear her voice in his head, the softness, the hesitation that had always been there when she wasn't sure if she was about to say something that would change everything. He couldn't deny the hope that surged within him at those few words. His fingers slowly moved over the screen, typing a response before he could second-guess himself. I'd like that. Can we meet? He hit send before he could stop himself, the phone slipping from his hand as he stared at the screen, unsure of what to expect next. The knot in his stomach tightened, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. After all this time, the chance to speak to Emma again felt like a lifeline, a way to reconnect with a past he wasn't ready to let go of. As the minutes ticked by, Jake found himself pacing back and forth, his mind racing through every possible scenario. What would they talk about? Would they be able to find common ground? Or had the distance between them grown too wide to bridge? The phone buzzed again, and he rushed to grab it, his hands trembling slightly. He saw her response, *I'll meet you at our old cafe at 3 p.m. I'll be there. The weight that had been pressing down on him lifted, just slightly. He had no idea how the meeting would go, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. The day was no longer just another day to be gotten through, it was a chance to change everything. To fix what he had broken. To find a way back to the person he used to be. And for the first time, he didn't feel so lost. The hours leading up to 3 p.m. felt like a lifetime to Jake. The seconds dragged on, each one heavier than the last. He couldn't focus on anything, his mind kept circling back to the same question, what will she say, what would Emma think of him now? He hadn't changed in the way he had hoped, and the guilt of it gnawed at him with every passing minute. There were moments when he considered backing out, when the fear of facing her, of confronting the mistakes he had made, seemed overwhelming. But the thought of letting this moment slip away, of never knowing if there was a way back, kept him going. He had to try. At 2:30 p.m., he found himself pacing again in front of the mirror, adjusting his collar one last time, straightening his tie with a meticulousness that felt almost absurd. The action was automatic, as if the small task would somehow calm the storm inside him. But it didn't. His reflection stared back at him, eyes wide with anxiety, mouth set in a firm line. He barely recognized the person in front of him anymore. Was this who he had become? But then, he shook his head, pushing those thoughts aside. This wasn't the time for self-doubt. This was the moment for action, for facing the truth. At precisely 3 p.m., Jake stepped out of his apartment and into the cool afternoon air. The walk to the cafe felt longer than usual, each step heavy with anticipation. The streets, usually bustling with the energy of city life, seemed oddly distant today. People walked by, heads down, lost in their own thoughts, and yet, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking towards something that could either make or break him. When he reached the cafe, his heart skipped a beat. He saw her sitting by the window, just as she had always done when they had spent hours there together, talking about everything and nothing. Emma. She hadn't changed much, but there was something about her that felt different now, more guarded, perhaps, as if she had built walls to protect herself from the hurt. Jake's throat tightened at the sight of her. He had missed her more than he cared to admit, and now, all he wanted was to somehow make it right. Emma looked up as he approached, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no smile, no immediate warmth. Just a quiet acknowledgement that they had both been waiting for this moment, though neither of them seemed quite ready for it. The silence between them was heavy, thick with everything that had been left unsaid. Jake opened his mouth, but the words seemed to fail him. How could he explain everything? How could he make her understand the turmoil he had felt, the mistakes he had made, and the regret that had consumed him? "Hi, Jake," Emma finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. She didn't sound angry, just distant, as though she were trying to keep her emotions in check. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" He nodded, unable to find his voice for a moment. He took a deep breath, his fingers lightly tapping on the table as he searched for the right words. I'm sorry, Emma. For everything. I know I hurt you. And I've been trying to make sense of it all. Trying to figure out what went wrong." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotions he had been bottling up for so long. Emma's gaze softened for a brief moment, but she quickly masked it, the walls rising again. She folded her hands on the table and leaned back slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "You're not the only one who's been trying to make sense of it, Jake," she said quietly. "But some things can't just be fixed with words. It's not that simple." Jake's chest tightened at her words, but he refused to back down. I know it's not. But I need you to know how sorry I am. I never meant to hurt you. He stopped himself, shaking his head. I was lost. I thought that if I kept pushing forward, if I focused on everything else, I could forget about the one thing that truly mattered. Emma's expression faltered for a moment, as if she were wrestling with her own emotions. She took a slow breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Jake," she began softly, "I loved you. But I couldn't keep waiting for you to realize what you had. For you to choose me when it was so obvious you were choosing everything else." Her voice quivered just slightly at the end, but she quickly regained her composure. The weight of her words hit Jake like a wave. He had known it, deep down, he had always known, but hearing it out loud, hearing the hurt in her voice, made it real in a way he couldn't ignore. He had taken her love for granted, and now he was paying the price for it. There was a long silence between them, the kind that spoke volumes without either of them saying a word. The world outside continued on, oblivious to the quiet, painful reckoning happening within the walls of the cafe. Jake finally broke the silence. "I don't know what I can say to make this right, Emma. But I want to try. I want to show you that I've changed. That I can be the person you deserve." Emma looked at him, her gaze steady but unreadable. It was clear that the damage hadn't been undone in the hours it had taken him to get here, but in that moment, there was a flicker of something, perhaps hope, perhaps a glimmer of the love they had shared. "I don't know if we can go back to what we were," she said softly, "but I'm willing to talk about it. For the first time in a long while, I think I'm ready to listen." Jake felt a rush of relief, though he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, and there were no guarantees. But in that moment, as they sat across from each other in the familiar cafe, Jake allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The conversation stretched on for hours, weaving through the threads of their shared past, each word a delicate attempt to rebuild what had been shattered. As they spoke, Jake felt the weight of his own regrets pressing heavily on his chest, but there was something else now too, something lighter, a small but unmistakable spark of hope. Emma was listening, truly listening, and for the first time in a long time, Jake felt as though he wasn't alone in this. The walls between them, though still present, had started to crack, and the space between their hearts, once an unbridgeable chasm, felt a little less daunting. At times, the conversation dipped into painful territory, the kind of raw honesty that neither of them had been willing to confront before. Emma spoke of the days she had spent wondering if she was enough, if he had ever truly cared the way she had cared for him. Jake felt the weight of each word, each question that he could never fully answer, but he offered what he could, the truth. He wasn't perfect, and he had failed her in ways he would never be able to undo, but he was here now, doing everything he could to show her that he wasn't the same man who had walked away months ago. "You're not the person I thought you were," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm, her eyes holding a mixture of hurt and understanding. "And I think that's been the hardest part. I loved you, Jake, but I couldn't keep loving the person you were pretending to be." Her words stung, more than he expected, but he understood. He had been pretending, for so long, he had been pretending that everything was fine, that he could handle the weight of the world on his shoulders without ever asking for help. He had buried his true self under layers of distractions, and in doing so, he had lost sight of the most important thing, her. "I get that now," Jake replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't being true to you, or to myself. I kept thinking that if I just kept going, I'd eventually find my way, but I lost sight of what really mattered along the way." Emma nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the same mixture of pain and understanding. She didn't say anything at first, but there was a long, thoughtful pause before she finally spoke again. "I think, for a long time, I didn't know who you were anymore," she said softly. "And maybe I didn't know who I was either. We were so lost in the noise of everything around us that we forgot what we meant to each other." The silence that followed felt different this time, less heavy, more contemplative. It was as if they had both come to an unspoken understanding, an acknowledgement that things had changed, that they were no longer the same people they had been when they first met. But there was also a quiet realization that they didn't have to be the same to move forward. They could rebuild, but it would take time, patience, and trust. "I can't promise that things will be perfect," Jake said finally, his voice steady. "But I want to try. I want to prove to you that I'm not the same person who let you go." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her gaze searching, as though weighing his words. The air between them seemed to hum with possibility, but there was also a hint of caution in her eyes. She had been hurt, and though she was willing to listen, she wasn't ready to dive back into something without knowing that it would be different this time. "I'm not sure what this will look like," Emma replied, her voice quieter now, tinged with vulnerability. "But I'm willing to see where it goes. I just need to know that we're not going down the same path again." Jake nodded, understanding the weight of her request. "We won't," he promised. "I won't let it happen again." The conversation shifted then, slowly, from painful reflection to cautious optimism. They began to talk about the small things, things they had once shared without thinking, like their favorite songs, the places they used to visit, the little moments that had made their time together feel so special. And in those quiet exchanges, Jake began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, peace. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a soft glow over the cafe, Emma reached for her coffee cup, her fingers brushing against his. For a fleeting moment, their hands touched, and though the gesture was small, it felt monumental. It was a silent acknowledgement of the connection they still shared, the bond that, despite everything, had never truly disappeared. "I'm glad we're doing this," Emma said softly, her voice carrying a note of gratitude. "Even if it's not perfect, at least it's real. And that's something I've missed." Jake smiled, the weight that had been pressing on his chest easing just a little. "Me too, Emma. Me too." And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe they could find their way back to something good, something real. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to try, ready to fight for the future they could still have, if they were both willing to take the first step forward together. The days that followed were a delicate dance, each step forward met with a quiet hesitation, as if both of them were waiting for the other to pull away. But something was different now. The space between them had shifted. The walls that had once seemed insurmountable were beginning to crumble, and in their place was a fragile yet undeniable trust, one that neither of them had fully anticipated, but both of them welcomed. Jake found himself thinking about Emma more than he had in months. He thought about her laugh, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of the things she loved. He thought about the small gestures, the way she would reach for his hand when they sat together, how she would tilt her head when she was listening intently, as if every word he said mattered to her. It was those little things, the things that had once seemed so ordinary, that now felt monumental. He realized that he had taken them for granted before, assuming that they would always be there. But now, with every conversation, every shared moment, he felt a deeper appreciation for the woman sitting across from him. He no longer saw her as the girl from his past, but as the woman who had shaped him in ways he hadn't even realized. Emma, on the other hand, was still cautious, though not as much as before. She had learned to guard her heart, but there was something in Jake's eyes, something sincere, that made her believe, if only for a moment, that they could still have something good. She wanted to believe that the man sitting in front of her wasn't the same one who had walked away, that he was truly ready to fight for them. But there were moments of doubt, moments when the old fears crept in, and she had to remind herself to take things slowly. Trust, once broken, was never easily rebuilt. One evening, as they sat on the park bench overlooking the city skyline, the air thick with the warmth of early summer, Jake turned to Emma, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, his words careful, measured. "But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere this time. I don't expect you to forgive me all at once. I just want to prove to you that I'm willing to put in the effort, to show you that I'm not the man I was before." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the bench. She could feel the sincerity in his words, the weight of his promises, and for a brief moment, she let herself believe him. "I don't know if I'm ready to dive back in completely," she replied softly, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "But I can't deny that I've missed us. I'm not saying I've forgotten what happened, but maybe, just maybe, we can try again, one step at a time." Jake nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't the grand declaration he had imagined, but it was enough. It was more than enough. He had no illusions about the challenges that lay ahead. The road to healing would be long, and there would be setbacks, moments of doubt and uncertainty. But as they sat there, side by side, the silence between them no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to rediscover each other, piece by piece. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt a flicker of hope. Not because she was certain that everything would work out, but because she knew that they were both willing to try. They were no longer the same people who had walked away from each other, but maybe, just maybe, they could be something even better. As the sun set, casting a golden hue over the world, Emma turned to Jake and gave him a small, tentative smile. "Let's see where this goes," she said, her voice soft but steady. Jake squeezed her hand gently, the weight of the moment not lost on him. "One step at a time," he replied, his heart lighter than it had been in months. And in that quiet moment, as the city lights began to twinkle in the distance, they both understood that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs to take together. The weeks that followed were a blend of progress and uncertainty, each moment carefully weighed by both Jake and Emma. It was as if they were building something new from the ground up, and though the foundation was fragile, it was theirs to nurture. There were times when the past threatened to resurface, when old fears and unresolved feelings made their presence known. But in those moments, they chose to confront them together, never letting them overshadow the delicate trust they were beginning to rebuild. Jake was committed to showing Emma, not just with his words but through his actions, that he had changed. He called her more often than he had before, always making sure to ask about her day, her thoughts, her dreams. He was patient, listening attentively as she spoke, respecting the boundaries she had set, never pushing her too hard or too fast. It was clear that he had learned from his mistakes, and in his quiet dedication, Emma began to see a side of him she had almost forgotten, the side that had first made her fall for him, the one that was kind and thoughtful, capable of love and loyalty. Emma, for her part, was still cautious, still wary of fully letting her guard down. She had been hurt before, and she knew that trusting someone again, especially someone she had once loved so deeply, was not something that could happen overnight. But as time passed, she found herself letting go of the anger that had once held her back. She saw the sincerity in Jake's eyes, the way he took responsibility for the hurt he had caused, and she couldn't help but soften. Each small gesture, each thoughtful word, built a bridge between them, one that allowed her to believe in the possibility of something better. Yet, deep down, she knew that the path to healing was not linear. There would be days when the old wounds would reopen, and the pain would feel fresh. But there would also be days when they would share laughter, when the air between them felt light, and for those moments, she allowed herself to hope. One evening, after a quiet dinner at a small, cozy restaurant, they walked along the familiar path in the park where they had spent so many hours together in the past. The air was cool, the sky a deep shade of navy, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. They walked in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that spoke volumes without saying a word. As they reached a small bench by the lake, Jake stopped and turned to Emma, his expression serious yet filled with a quiet warmth. "I know it's not easy," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper against the night. "And I don't expect everything to fall into place right away. But I just need you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, Emma. Not this time." Emma met his gaze, her heart skipping a beat at the sincerity she saw in his eyes. For a long moment, she simply stood there, letting his words wash over her. It was then that she realized just how much she had missed him, how much she had missed them. She had spent so long building walls, convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she was better off on her own. But now, standing there with him, she saw the possibility of something different. Not perfection, but something real. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "I'm scared of getting hurt again. But I also know that I can't keep living in the past. I want to try, Jake. I really do." Jake's face softened, and without a word, he reached for her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. He didn't need her to say more, didn't need her to make any grand declarations. He only needed her to take that small step forward, the same way he had. And as their fingers intertwined, it was as if the world around them faded into the background, leaving only the two of them in that moment. "I'm here, Emma," he repeated, his voice full of conviction. "And I'll be here every step of the way." She nodded, her heart full of a quiet hope. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if they could truly rebuild what had been broken. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months: hope. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was all you needed. As they sat on the bench, the lake shimmering in the moonlight, they both understood that they were taking a leap of faith, one that was fragile, uncertain, but filled with the possibility of something new. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.